Where does Turkey stand in these developments? Since the inception of the recent events, Turkey has adopted a principled and value-based approach. Prime Minister Erdogan was the first leader to call upon the President of Egypt to meet the demands of the people or step down. As the transition ensued, Prime Minister Erdogan made the case in Cairo that the principle of secularism was central to a functioning democracy. We very much welcome the completion of the presidential elections in Egypt. We wish that the results of these elections, which are of great importance for the progress of the transition process and democratic transformation in Egypt, would be beneficial for the people of Egypt and for our region. We strongly believe that our Egyptian brothers will emerge even stronger from these processes. It's essential that the Egyptian people's free will is represented by all sides and that the transition process is completed in a successful and timely manner, in line with the Egyptian people's legitimate demands and aspirations. It's equally essential for Egyptian authorities to maintain a constructive, conciliatory, and inclusive approach throughout the efforts to overcome the challenges ahead. On the other hand, Turkey's position regarding Libya has also been unambiguous. We extended our support to the NATO-led operation, recognized the International Transition Council, and have been continuing our engagement with the current government of Libya. When it comes to our immediate neighbor, Syria, we have been consistent from the very beginning. Even before the tidal wave of democratization reached their shores, we continued the consistency in our policies. In our messages to the Syrian government, we emphasized the need for freedom, equality, justice, and democracy. We made it clear that to postpone, delay, or worse, to ignore the will of the people would lead to chaos. We exerted enormous efforts in public and behind closed doors in order to convince the Syrian leadership to lead democratic transition. I regret to say that our neighbor Syria has failed miserably in analyzing the developments in the region and to reacting to the currents of change. The brutal Ba'ath regime continues to use oppression and violence on its own people. In response to that, we continue to be actively engaged in the efforts to increase the regional and international pressure on the Syrian government and to find an appropriate solution to this crisis. While President Assad continues to fool himself that there can be a realistic exit for him from this hell he and his cronies have created, the situation has come to a critical mass following the shooting of an unarmed RF-4 Turkish aircraft by Syria in international airspace Friday of last week. Although the aircraft, which was on a test and training mission, displayed no hostile attitude or maneuver and was flying in the international airspace of the Eastern Mediterranean and its identification systems open, the Syrian forces did not hesitate to shoot at our aircraft without any prior warning. After receiving a deadly blow, the aircraft diverted towards the Syrian coast and crashed into the sea at 8 nautical miles off the coast of Latakia. Now the Syrians are engaged in a disinformation campaign on the matter to slant the facts and to evade responsibility. They even claim that our aircraft was shot in Syrian airspace, despite the existence of foolproof evidence indicating the opposite. Both Turkish and Syrian radar and radio records prove that our aircraft was shot at the international airspace. The illegal and unacceptable Syrian attack on our aircraft, flying solo and unarmed at the international airspace is a hostile act against our national security. It runs against all principles of good faith and good neighborliness and is a flagrant and grave violation of international law. Therefore, as we step into a new state of affairs with Syria, I must underline that our threat perception from Syrian regime has changed with this incident. We now regard Syrian regime as a visible threat to our national security, and the rules of engagement of Turkish armed forces have been modified accordingly. We have acted in restraint so far, yet we will not hesitate to take the necessary steps within international law and reserve our rights to respond to this attack. However, let me be crystal clear on a crucial point. The measures to be taken by Turkey will be of a defensive nature. We had consultations yesterday with our NATO allies under the framework Article 4 of North Atlantic Treaty. We have asked for solidarity from our allies, and they have declared that they will stand together with us in the spirit of full solidarity. The 911-kilometer-long border between Turkey and Syria is also the border of the alliance. We welcome our allies, having stated that they will remain seized of the developments of the southeastern border of NATO. Dear guests, the people of Syria are our brothers. Turkey is determined to maintain its support to the people of Syria until they are freed from this brutal dictatorship. Turning to Iraq, ladies and gentlemen, let me say that the developments there are also of critical importance in regional affairs. With the final departure of the US troops at the end of the last year, Iraq has regained its rightful place in the community of nations as a fully sovereign state. As a friend and neighbor which extended all assistance it could to help the stabilization and security efforts in Iraq, Turkey warmly welcomed this historic development. Today, Iraq is the second largest export market for Turkey with a bilateral trade volume of $12 billion. Turkey has a wide diplomatic representation throughout the country, with its embassy in Baghdad, consulate generals in Erbil, Mosul, and Basra. The Turkish business community's operations are no longer limited only to KRG. Our businessmen are increasingly engaged in central and southern regions, and Turkish Airlines is carrying hundreds of Iraqis from Basra, Najaf, Mosul, Baghdad, and Erbil to Istanbul every day of the week. After decades of conflict, embargoes, wars, and oppression, our Iraqi brothers are now in charge of their own destiny. If managed well, this new era in the history of Iraq can only bring peace, prosperity, and security for Iraq, its neighbors, and beyond. In that regard, Iraq is at a very critical juncture. The relative security and stability that Iraq achieved at a very high price is still fragile. In order to meet the challenges it is facing, Iraq needs to make meaningful progress in two main areas: power sharing and revenue sharing. Our Iraqi brothers have suffered dramatically from ethnic and sectarian agendas, as well as authoritarian and centrist policies in the past. No other country in the region has the humanitarian and natural wealth that Iraq has, and this wealth can only be beneficial if all Iraqis have an equal and fair say in the way their country to be run. Turkey will continue to engage actively with all the segments of Iraqi society to help Iraq successfully navigate this volatile period. in our eyes, there is only one Iraq from Zakho to Basra. And regardless of their backgrounds, our goal is to help all Iraqis. Our policy towards Iraq is driven by principles such as inclusiveness, power sharing, and a functioning free market economy that is integrated with the region and international markets. We stand ready to support any leader and political group that will work for the realization of these principles, because we believe that the only way to enhance the territorial integrity, political unity of Iraq is to honor these principles. Our profound concern is that unless these principles are upheld, a dark future may be awaiting Iraq, and as a neighbor who paid a very high price for the instability in Iraq over many decades, we will do our utmost to prevent that eventuality. As always, the strategic partnership between Turkey and the United States is indispensable in this endeavor. Turkey's ever-increasing cooperation with the KRG is the linchpin of stability and prosperity in Iraq. Our cooperation with KRG encompasses the wide range of sectors and is geared towards serving the interests of both Iraq and Turkey. We are convinced that if a more inclusive system is forged in Baghdad, which allows for the meaningful participation of all Iraqi groups, then KRG's increased involvement in the central government will inevitably consolidate the unity of the country. Dear friends, the rising tension in Iran's nuclear program is another significant issue. On Turkey's doorstep, and in a literal way, against which we cannot afford to remain indifferent. We do not want Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. We do not want any other country in the region acquire nuclear weapons. Turkey is probably the only country most directly concerned about the possibility of Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. Such a development would gravely threaten the peace, security, and stability in the region by triggering a nuclear armament race. That is completely against Turkey's vision for the region, and we have said so at every opportunity in New York, Brussels, and in Tehran.